Well, I'm here. It's 11 o'clock, and my name is James Patrick. And if now seems like an okay time for me to start this cool little hangout, we're going to do some education, maybe a little bit of edutainment around the idea of setting up your own home composition studio.
I'm Vanessa Rose. I'm the President and CEO of American Composers Forum. Thank you so much, JP, for joining us and offering this to everybody today. And this is one of a series of different webinars that we're doing together with our friends at Slam Academy and also Springboard for the Arts. And if you see our list of webinars and you see things that are not there that you think would be really helpful for you and others, please let us know. We really want to be here to both offer you support at this time, community, connection when you're all at home, and trying to be creative and trying to sustain yourselves at this time. So however we can be helpful, we would love to hear from you.
Or for those of you who don't know me, again, my name is James Patrick, and I come with about 25 years of making music experience. I was the founder of Slam Academy along with Dr. Jay Allen, as well as had quite a bit of experience working for cool people. A lot of my mentors were like Prince's engineers and Prince's bass players and stuff. I grew up in Chanhassen, so there's some dots that got connected there. Pretty cool early on for me, and now I'm here. I run Slam Academy. I'm the chief content officer, and we are primarily an electronic music school. So we teach people how to, build their home studio, and compose and arrange, but we do a lot of production and sound design and stuff like that. So quick plug there, if anyone's looking to learn more about electronic music production, definitely hit up Slam Academy. We're the best place to learn how to make your own electronic music. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about how to set up your own home composition studio. And this is a really good, perfect time for this class because everyone's stuck at home, and all the better reason also probably wanting to save money. So we're going to try and keep this on the affordable tip. And I've got a little slideshow put together to cover, I think, pretty much everything you're going to want to know if you're going to want to start composing and arranging your own original music at home, which many of you probably are, but maybe we'll be able to uncover some tips. We're going to go through hardware needs, software needs, how to save money on a budget. I'll give you a lot of recommendations for different types of equipment to maybe use or don't use, as well as we're going to go through signal flow and signal management in your home studio, and even get a little chance to talk about acoustic treatment and how to make sure you're getting the best recordings out of your microphones and also your mixes. You want to make sure you have a nice quiet room to work in. So all that stuff we're going to talk about now. And again, I've got the chat up, and I'm going to keep an eye out for any questions. But one thing I mentioned earlier is that this is your class. So please, any questions you have or any chance you feel so inspired to interrupt me, please do it, because I'm really into the discourse aspect of this. So some nice links up there in the chat too, also to Slam Academy. Thanks for that, Vanessa. I can go ahead and give myself a little more gain. I'm pretty loud on my end. I saw James saying I was a little quiet. Well, yeah, I'm watching my meters. I'll make sure I'm nice and loud on my end. So maybe crank your end up a little bit. Cool. Okay, super. Thank you for the input, though. If anyone can't hear me or anything's getting weird on the technology aspect, definitely please hit me up. So here comes the screen. Oh, and one thing I got to ask to the hosts, if they can allow me to do some screen sharing. I'm actually not technically the host of this Zoom meeting, so I'll need to have that function unlocked. So that's probably Vanessa or someone. There we go. Thank you very much. So I'm going to see if I can go full screen on this and see how this goes. So if everyone can see my screen now, I'm going to go ahead and just talk about some basic things we're going to want to make sure we cover today in the Hangout. I'll start at the top here. To set up a affordable home composition studio, the biggest things you want to make sure you understand as far as technology is concerned is the hardware. So let's take a few minutes to discuss the essential hardware ingredients required to build a home composition studio. Some of these things are probably review, but I'd like to take a few minutes to make sure everyone has a good grip on which kind of microphones you probably want, which kind of instruments I would recommend as far as at least best practices for sampling and recording your instruments. Also, do you need mixers and mic preamps and all the kind of classic analog technology? Some of that stuff is valuable, but in modern times, a lot of it's unnecessary, etc. So let's just take a few minutes to talk about some of these hardware things. A lot of people, part of being a home composer really is having a good grip on your sound sources. Whether it's vocals or your guitars or your amplifiers or anything that you're actually going to be capturing for your performance or your arrangements. Having a great microphone or having a decent microphone is becoming a lot more affordable than it used to be. Even when I grew up, having a nice microphone would have costed, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Also, you usually need a really nice microphone preamp, and this scenario gets pretty expensive pretty quickly. That microphone industry has completely changed in the past 5 years, and nowadays there are really great microphones you can get for $150 in the condenser department. So let's talk really quickly about a condenser versus a dynamic microphone. I'll just go really briefly here, but there are really two different kinds of mics. There are mics that are made to be on the stage. Those are dynamic microphones, and then there are microphones that are meant to be in the studio. The condenser microphone is the microphone that you want to use in the studio. And generally for vocals and other studio applications, a large diaphragm condenser microphone is what you're going to end up using for that. There's a really popular company called Blue Microphones, makes all different kinds of microphones for under $200, $250. And many of them are even USB. So they have a sound card built right in that'll convert the analog signal to digital. And you'll just USB the microphone straight into your laptop or into your computer, and that's going to handle a lot of the technology, and you're saving money on the microphone preamp and on the mic cable even, and also getting into a pretty solid large diaphragm condenser. The ones Blue is a company that I recommend for like really affordable options. But then also, if you're looking at just a nice, solid, non-USB microphone. There's a microphone company called Cascade, and they make a microphone called the Fathead that you can get for, I think, $150 or $200, and that's become kind of for an analog microphone that's not USB. The Cascade Fathead is a microphone that I really love for the money, and for recording vocals and all sorts of home recording stuff. The large diaphragm condenser of any variety is going to be great, and the microphone industry has become really competitive. If I was going on a real budget, I would get a USB large diaphragm condenser microphone from Blue. I would probably spend $200 on it, $150, and all my recording needs would be pretty much handled. I also believe that everyone who's at home being a composer should have a dynamic microphone as well. There's one industry standard dynamic mic that you probably have all used before called a Shure SM58. They make an instrument version of that called a Shure SM57, and that's a $90 microphone, and you can defend yourself with it in the middle of an outbreak. They're pretty much impossible to break. That's kind of why they're made for the stage. But dynamic microphones in general have a mechanical transducer. So instead of a little thin sheet of mylar that can pick up very sensitive frequencies, like in a large diaphragm condenser, that's really great for recording sensitive, subtle articulations and such. The dynamic microphone is harder to move, so it doesn't pick up the high frequencies quite as well. But again, for being on a stage and also avoiding feedback, the dynamic microphone is great. Another reason why you might want a dynamic microphone at home in the studio is if you're recording guitars or guitar amplifiers, hanging a microphone over a speaker cabinet, kind of a rock and roll practice. Dynamic mics can be really good for that too. So moving on from the microphone thing, instruments. I generally think that every home composer needs to have a nice sound module of some sorts. This is just basically a fancy word for a keyboard instrument that has a bunch of sounds in it. really popular keyboards for this kind of stuff. Like the Roland makes one called the Phantom. That's for a lot of composers prefer having weighted keys because you're just familiar with the feel of a real piano. The Phantom, Phantom 6 or Phantom 8, they're not super cheap, but if you want to have one singular keyboard that feels like a real piano that has an entire orchestra worth of sounds in it, this is another kind of invaluable composer tool, I feel. For us in the studio, we use a Roland Phantom 08, and then we have a Roland Jupiter as well, which is a little more kind of synthesizer feeling on the keys, but just billions of amazing sounds built in. And the nice thing about having sounds built into a keyboard is that MIDI, as you maybe are familiar with, MIDI is pretty limited as far as its resolution. Again, as far as articulations and stuff, I mean, not sure if you've ever tried to play like a MIDI trombone or something on a MIDI keyboard, but it just does not sound very real at all, just because of the nature of MIDI. It just can't articulate those gestures the same way that a real musician can on a real instrument, of course. But when you have sounds built into a keyboard, they are capable of articulating on a much higher resolution level than if you're just connecting a MIDI keyboard to a computer. So just something to consider. A lot of people find, home composers find that the ceiling is pretty low for how good they can make their own music sound. And I found that having a sound module, like a keyboard with sounds built in, excuse me, really goes a long way. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, this was the Korg Triton, was the standard, industry standard instrument, if you guys remember those, or else maybe the Yamaha Motif, which kind of took over around the year 2000. Those became the industry standard kind of sound module keyboards for home composers. Nowadays, I would probably get a Jupiter or a Phantom by Roland, though, myself. Okay. Instruments, you know, you want to have access to the world of sounds. So having a nice sound module goes a long way. As far as I wrote just mixers and microphone preamps, a lot of people, especially if you're like over 40 years old, when you think about a studio, the first thing you think about is a big mixing console in the middle of the room. And I myself too, it took me a while to get over this, but basically we don't really need those anymore. There are a couple different ways to run your home studio, but like I was saying before, with so many things integrated now digitally with USB and such, the need for microphone preamps is kind of unnecessary, really. And same with the big mixer. If you were a recording engineer and this was about recording bands and stuff, we'd maybe be talking more about mixers. But for composers, we don't need any of that stuff. Save the money, save the time. The other thing about cables, I just put this on here. This may sound simple, but again, if this was an audio engineering class, we'd be talking a lot more about these different variables. I'm happy to answer questions about balanced versus unbalanced, etc. But in general, like I said, most peripherals are connected to the computer with USB nowadays. So we're kind of able to save a lot of money on not spending a bunch of money on mixers, mic pre's, cables, and even audio and MIDI interfaces are all built into the equipment nowadays. So if you're familiar offhand of how audio and MIDI interfaces work, they're basically the ears and mouth of the computer. So if you're going to be recording anything or playing anything back, usually you end up with a third-party audio interface. Most common for composers is probably Motu or Universal Audio. Those are brands that I really like and I recommend. You can get into a Universal Audio stereo sound card. They're kind of expensive for about $800 or $900, and that's going to be basically the same ins and outs as you might already have on your laptop. So again, since we're talking about a home composer studio that's affordable, I would honestly say until you're in a situation where you're like recording bands and stuff or recording yourself doing a lot of live instrumentation, I'd probably skip worrying about an audio or MIDI interface as well. Now, the one exception there is a lot of composers really enjoy working in surround sound. If you are going to be going that route, it's not going to be super affordable no matter how you cut it, but you're going to need an audio interface with 4 or 5 or maybe 8 outputs to distribute the sound around the room and such. So composers that are writing music for film have to do that because maybe you're just arranging the notes most of the time, but when it comes down to actually placing the sounds in the surround sound field if you are going to be working on that level, like really doing it all on your own. I've scored a lot of films, and only on the very big ones do I get to hand the stems off to a mix engineer. Usually if I'm scoring it, if it's an independent film, I'm also doing the sound design and I'm also mixing it. Because, you know, you've got a zero budget or a low budget scenario. In that case, having a surround sound interface or an interface that can handle multi-channel audio is going to be pretty important. Again, for brands that I recommend, Motu I really like, and Universal Audio is the other brand that's really, really awesome. Anyway, so moving on, and again, I'm totally here for questions. I'm just kind of busting through my list of things that everyone should know, I think. The next thing that a lot of people ask about is, you know, about the computer, obviously, and do I need a Mac or PC for home composition? They're all perfectly good. You'll get some people saying Macs are better or whatever, and ultimately that's not true. A computer is a computer. It's all about how you use it. Most modern audio software does work best on a Mac. I'm just saying that as far as the way the Mac is integrated for creating art and really designed to do that. That's great, but nowadays I know a lot of composers that run PCs or Linux boxes at home, and they're able to do a lot. So it's kind of what you're comfortable with is really what matters. It's all about workflow. It's not about, you know, the brand. So you get workflow just by picking one and just using it all the time. So I think most people are on Macs in the audio environment, but.
Yeah, Jason has a question. Are the condenser mics good for spoken word podcast too?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, any sort of podcast or any sort of dialogue recording, large diaphragm condenser mic is going to be exactly what you want. You can just Google large diaphragm condenser mic with USB, and you're going to get ones that have the audio interface built in with one mic cable. And I think for podcasting and stuff, that is definitely the best choice, because you don't want to worry about all the cables and all the monkeying around. You just want to plug in and start talking, or in the case of spoken word, you know, when the muse hits or whatever, you just want to go. So large diaphragm condenser that's USB. And again, brands, you know, nothing at the $150 price point is going to be serviceable. So just keep this in mind, that anything you're buying at that price point, don't drop it or break it, because no one's ever going to repair those kinds of things. They just go in the garbage. So, you know, watch out for that. So like I've thrown several Blue microphones away, you know, because like it gets knocked over and the capsule cracks or something weird happens, and there's no servicing things that are built at that price point. They're all glued together on the inside. Unfortunately, that's just kind of what you get for the money. So do watch out for that. But yeah, Blue makes a really nice one. I can't remember what it's called for podcasts, but it mounts right on the table, and it has a volume knob and a mute switch right on it, and it's USB and it's black. And I can't quite remember the model number on that one, but just check. They have a nice website. You can look at their options. Thanks for the question, though. So last little hardware note I wanted to mention is everyone, of course, I mean, if you're a composer, you need to have a keyboard nearby. I definitely think that having a nice 61 key MIDI keyboard is kind of essential. As far as makes and models, I mean, a MIDI keyboard is pretty much a MIDI keyboard. They're pretty much all the same. For about $100, you can get a 61 key M Audio keyboard that has no buttons or knobs or anything, just a whole bunch of keys, and that's going to be pretty essential too. For people who are using the Ableton Live software, which is probably the most advanced composition software out there nowadays, there's a device called the Push, which is a really great composition tool as well, but you'll know if you need one of those. But yeah, MIDI keyboard, I recommend the M Audio Key Station 61 is $100, and that's just a great way to get your hands on some keys. Otherwise, for a little bit more money, I might recommend Novation makes a really nice line of keyboards. They have a line called Novation Key Station, they're called. And the 61 key, I think, is about $240, $250, but it has a bunch of knobs and buttons you can use to control parameters in your software and stuff, which can be really nice. But yeah, I think, you know, on a total budget, you get yourself a USB large diaphragm condenser mic, and you plug it into your Mac or your PC, and you have a MIDI controller keyboard also connected. So once you record your sounds, you can then sequence and arrange them with the keyboard. Well,
Jennifer is wondering about the Blue Yeti Pro.
Yeah, in fact, Yeti, I think, was the model that I was trying to remember as a tabletop one. That, yeah, I think, I'm sorry that I'm not remembering the model number, but I think Yeti sounds right. I don't think I've ever seen the Pro one. I'm not sure what that is. That's probably something newer that I'm not familiar with. But yeah, Yeti was the tabletop one that I really liked. It was it looked nice too, and it felt solid. It was really good. And that one never broke on us, by the way. So maybe something about it being tabletop mounted, just less chance of just dropping it because it's got a nice heavy metal base and it's always just sitting on your desk all the time. So less chance of it getting fumbled around on. Thanks for letting me know when the chat happens. I'm trying to stay full screen here and I'm navigating this Zoom environment here. So I'm gonna move on past hardware. So those are really all the essential hardware things you need. The other hardware thing I would recommend, guys, is a really comfortable chair. You're gonna be sitting in that thing a lot. So beyond the hardware needs, anyone who's composing at home is going to have a pretty good grip on software options, obviously, if nothing else, just for recording and arranging notes and such. A lot of you probably use like Sibelius or Finale or something like that for composition. Maybe you're familiar with Logic or Pro Tools. These are standard DAWs, digital audio workstations, but let's take a look at some other options that are out there. I'm pretty sure Audacity has been covered in a couple of these ACF Springboard Hangouts. Audacity is a really great tool for just home recording. It's basically Pro Tools free, which is pretty slick. Also, Pro Tools, which is the industry standard for audio recording, there is a free version that they put out. Just about, I don't know, 6 months ago, kind of perfect timing before the pandemic. They put out a free version of Pro Tools. So it's very limited, of course, but either Audacity or Pro Tools free would be free options for you to get into for just home recording, And definitely if I was doing podcasts or spoken word, you got to have an audio editor that a software that you can remove all the likes and ums and stuff and condense it and, polish it up, maybe even put a little bit of effects on your voice. You're going to be able to do that in all these softwares, but excuse me, those top two are the two free options that I would recommend. Looking into software that's not free, but pretty affordable, Logic X. This used to be $1,000 software application back in the day for a long time. And then now it's $99 at the App Store on your Mac. It's Mac only, but for composers, I'm willing to bet at least a few of you out there are already using Logic. It's I'd say for composers, it's the most popular software in the world still. Mostly because it comes with an amazing library of virtual sounds. So back to that whole thing I was talking about buying a sound module keyboard like a Phantom or a Jupiter. Those things are at least about $1,000 or more. With Logic X, it's $99 and you get an entire universe of sounds with that program. So if you wanted to arrange ethnic music or Balinese, gamelan, I mean, you got sounds all loaded up in that Logic program that are pretty amazing. So the other thing that's really great about Logic, also Pro Tools, there's a score editor where Pro Tools, I think, links up with Finale, and you run them side by side. Logic has its own built-in score editor. So for people, again, traditional composers who are writing on staff paper, you can get some nice, easily facilitate some translation there between your scores and your actual software sequences. So that can be a major time saver. So Logic. On the more advanced level, Cubase and Logic are both highly advanced DAWs. Cubase is a little more expensive, I think, but if you wanted to get into advanced MIDI editing and advanced audio processing and sound design and stuff, Cubase is a really popular choice. Less people use it than they used to, probably mostly because of these next two options, in particular the last one. Another really popular tool, especially from like the early 2000s, that is still rocking, is called Reason. I'm pretty sure at least a few of you have used Reason before. Reason is a virtual rack of software instruments. So if you, again, were to say, I just really need some synthesizer sounds and some guitar sounds, and I just need a bunch of sounds, Reason is a really great choice. And if you were running, say, Audacity or Pro Tools free that didn't have a lot of sounds, you could also get Reason and run it side by side, and they actually connect in real time under the hood. So if you, a really, really common, like, in fact, when I learned how to, when I was studying composition, I used a MIDI keyboard and a Reason rack for all my sounds, and I just recorded it all right into Pro Tools or Logic. So there can be a little bit of a handshake that happens there. That technology is called Rewire, allowing different software applications to connect under the hood and share their audio and MIDI signals. So Reason is a really great add-on. If any of you out there are already comfortable with Audacity, but you just want some more sounds, check out Reason. Cool. And then last but not least, I saved the best for last. Ableton Live is the ultimate software for making music on your computer. There's just no comparison. For anyone that wants to unlock kind of a little bit of a real-time improvisational aspect in your home compositions, there's nothing like Ableton. Also, same if you ever imagine dragging yourself to a place to play music live, let's hope that society allows for such a thing. It's called Live for a reason. It was originally designed to be a performance tool, but composers like working quickly, just like live performers do. So the Ableton Live software has really taken the entire world by storm over the past 10 years and is the ultimate home music making software by far. So it honestly, creatively kind of destroys all the other options. There's a little bit more of a learning curve though. So
two quick questions.
Cool.
Actually three now. Alan asks, does Reason allow you to score to video? That's the first question, and we'll move on.
That's an awesome question. And Reason natively does not support that. But again, since Reason can rewire into just about any other DAW, if you were, like for me also, I do a lot of scoring. I'll run my main DAW, in my case would be Ableton Live, but it could be Pro Tools or Logic or Cubase. All of those support video. And then I would run Reason at the same time, and it would just pipe its audio right into tracks in the other software. So I'd be able to have any of these larger DAWs running with the video in it, and then Reason would essentially be an instrument rack on a track or on a variety of tracks in that same session, if that makes sense.
And Gail asks, do the sound in Logic replace the need of a nice keyboard with sound like Roland?
I love that question. That's a great question. In some ways it does, because the sound library within Logic is absolutely immense and very, very robust and beautiful sounding. But the limitation you might run into, especially with certain acoustic instruments that are really expressive, I frequently use brass instruments in this case. The way, like a trombone, again, is the perfect example of the way, if you imagine articulating between notes on a trombone and then all of a sudden trying to realize that same kind of motion on a MIDI keyboard, it's kind of like impossible because you're stuck to these chromatic scale and it's on off of notes. There's no real legato, portamento capabilities per se. You can fine tune your Logic instruments with the MIDI keyboard to sound like a real trombone or whatever. But that's one thing that maybe would be lost a little bit compared to having a sound module. The sound modules that are built in are not reliant on just this low resolution MIDI signal for which notes to play and when. They're internally controlled by their own native keyboard. And so, for instance, if you have a trombone patch up on a sound module and you play a couple notes legato, say you play an octave, it will naturally sense how long you're overlapping those notes and give you a nice portamento into the notes, because it's able to like listen on a higher resolution level to the keyboard versus just MIDI, because MIDI, you know, was invented in 1982 and it's really relatively extremely low res. So it's the equivalent to just kind of like on, off versus really gentle articulation, resolution, you know, that you can get out of an internal keyboard. So in 99% of the time, Logic with $100 MIDI keyboard is going to be more than good enough. You know, I just think I've seen a lot of composers complain about how certain acoustic instruments are impossible to properly sequence with a MIDI keyboard. And I think this is a big reason why pro composers end up going with the big keyboards with the built-in sounds sometimes. You know, when it's time to play the brass section and you want to play a chord and have it sound like a brass section, I mean, one stab will sound fine with a MIDI keyboard, but when it comes to articulating a whole composition, all the different subtle nuances, MIDI, you end up doing a lot of editing with the pencil tool to get it to be just right. Whereas, so that's a long answer for a short question, but hopefully I touched on that for you a little bit.
Cool. More question popped up. Jason asked, is Ableton good for making live loops, etc., and playing over them?
That is what Ableton Live does.
Nice. Michael asked, does Ableton Live have any tool similar to the Logic's score editor?
It does not. So this is a kind of great question. This is a dividing line between people who use Ableton Live entirely versus people that use it a little bit, but then do most of their heavier work in a program that has a score editor. One of my closest composer friends runs Pro Tools for all of his scoring stuff, and then runs Ableton for all of his live looping and improvisation stuff. The nice thing is that Ableton Live and Pro Tools also do rewire. So if you were running both of those at the same time, or Ableton and any of these other programs, in fact, everything on this list supports rewire. So say you did have a $100 version of Ableton Live and a free version of Pro Tools, you could run them both at the same time, and they again would share MIDI and audio signals in real time through the same mixer. So they would become one, which is really cool. Cool, awesome. Thank you for the really great questions. I appreciate that a lot. If you guys want to know more about any of this stuff, my name is James Patrick, and my email address is jp@slamacademy.com, and I'm really into helping you guys have fun during this kind of unfortunate time, and I'm into making the most of it. I've personally, my creative output like really stopped for a while when the outbreak kicked, where I was like, whoa, I don't know if I'm going to make any art now. This is so weird. And then after a week or two, I opened up the computer and just, it was like a whole new flow happening. I don't know, the world has changed. It's a great time to compose music. Was there another chat I saw pop in there?
Yep. Alan asked again, have you used Studio One at all?
Yeah, you know, thanks so much for asking that. I probably should have included Presonus Studio One in this list. As a matter of fact, I think that's a great catch. That's a software that I personally do not use. I use all these other ones quite a bit, but Studio One it's a really affordable and really powerful recording and editing software that I've seen some really great works be created in, even recently. So people are using that more and more, and I've been meaning to pick that back up and tinker around in it. But yeah, Presonus Studio One, I think you can get it for $100, $90 or $100, and it's a really powerful recording and editing software too. And it also supports MIDI, so you can put your virtual instruments in there. And it also is rewire compatible, I'm pretty sure. So you'd be able to connect other softwares to it in real time and everything. So Presonus Studio One. Next time I give this slideshow, I'll have that in the list. Thanks for the check on that.
I'll ask, if you are starting out looking for film scoring projects, is one DAW really advised?
That's a good question. If you're going to get started on doing some scoring to film, I wouldn't use Cubase or Reason. And if you were going to do a lot of MIDI work where you're sequencing and arranging virtual instruments, honestly, Pro Tools is okay, but not that great. I would probably do Logic or Ableton. If I imagined making my own sounds at all, where the sounds that I'm creating actually I'm able to get in close intimately on the sounds themselves, Ableton is by far the best choice. But Logic is awesome for composition. And again, with the score editor function, that's still what I think why a lot of composers still just use Logic, because the score editor capability. And again, having just this massive sea of beautiful virtual sounds. So Logic is a really good choice. Another cool thing about Logic is, I mean, GarageBand is a software that a lot of people have seen, and everyone has it already on their computers, and Logic is basically GarageBand on steroids. So there's a nice kind of, for people who have tinkered around in GarageBand, there's a nice learning curve that just slides right into Logic nicely. So if I was just getting started on that, I'd maybe tinker around in GarageBand a little bit. It's free, it's on your computer. And then if you decide that you like it, then get into Logic. Otherwise, if you're not feeling it, check out a free version of Ableton. I'd like to point out that the Ableton Live software, you can download the full version for free for 90 days. It's normally a 30-day trial, but during the outbreak, they've extended it to 90. So if you did hit up ableton.com and downloaded that software, there's built-in lessons and tutorials right in there. And for making sounds to visual imagery, it is totally profound. I'd do Logic or Ableton. That's the answer, I guess.
Nice. Helena is wondering, to record a live concert, what portable recording tool would you recommend? Great.
Most people who are doing field recording or like mobile recording end up using a Zoom H6. This is a device that I bet at least a few people in the room even currently have. I'm speaking through one right now. In fact, I'll mute my mic for a sec to put it in front of the camera. So it's got a nice little meter bridge on the front, and it's got 6 or 8 inputs. So, pardon me, tried to not bump that. So you can, you could have a couple of stereo overhead microphones for capturing the room, as well as a few direct lines, if maybe there were electronic instruments or anything that could be recorded direct. And then there are also detachable capsules. Right now I'm using the large diaphragm condenser capsule because it's dialogue, right? But they have a shotgun capsule for recording things from far away. They have a XY pattern microphone, like a dual small diaphragm condenser that's great for field recordings and stuff. So the Zoom H6 you can get into for around 240, 250 bucks, maybe 300 if you want the Rode case and all the connectors and stuff. And it's for mobile concert recording, I think that's the best choice. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you just do a laptop and a mobile interface. So if you're in a situation where you need more than 4 or 6 microphones, like maybe you're actually really gonna record a concert for real and be able to mix it later, where you have individual isolated tracks for each instrument. Like if you're gonna mix or produce the concert in post-production, you'd wanna have more than 6 lines. You'd wanna have a couple signals for probably each band member. And so in that case, that's when you bring a laptop and an audio interface. So this is where I really recommend Motu. Motu makes a device called the Motu Ultralight. They also have one called the 828, and they have another one called the Traveler. These are boxes with 1 million jacks in the back for all sorts of microphones and inputs and outputs, and those things start at around $600 or $700 for the box. And then you got to get your microphones. So this is where the H6 for 250 bucks is a really, really nice choice. Since we're talking budget mode, it's really great. Everyone I know who makes music has an H6, honestly. Not to say everyone, but in the Slam Academy realm, where a lot of people are creating their own sounds, you know, going out and recording sounds at the hardware store or whatever, you know, the H6 is awesome for that. So, and it works as an interface. As I'm using it right now, I have it connected with a USB cable, and it's like having a USB microphone on my desk, just like we were talking about, but I'm doing it all inside of the H6. So that's a great question. Cool. All right, so let's take a look at the next little chapter here. We're going to talk about signal flow. This is kind of maybe sounds a little nerdy at first, but you got to know your signal flow because this is how your studio operates. So there are really two different kind of big picture standards for how you're going to run your home studio. If you're a musician, or say you play live instruments, especially if you play live instruments with other people, the analog studio configuration is pretty attractive. This is where you're going to, like we were talking about before, probably have a mixer and be able just to walk into your garage or your recording environment, hit the power switch and start playing and hear yourself. So the pros of the analog studio configuration, where you're running your instruments into a mixer again, is that there's no need to connect a computer at all when you're just playing. You want to sit down and play some scales, that's cool. You don't have to go turn your computer on. You just start playing. The downside of having the mixing console and in the analog kind of studio environment is that there's a lot more noise. So if you get your recordings, you have a really good take and you're like, that was awesome. I really nailed that. And then you go look at the recording and there's like this grit in the bottom of it and it's all dirt from the mixer. Even if you have a really nice new mixer, it's still going to introduce a little bit of noise. So that noise is desirable if you're like Abbey Road Recording Studio, but if you're like recording a podcast, you do not want that noise in there at all. So that would suck. So the digital studio configuration, though, is much more common for home composers, and that's best for solo artists too. Here we run instruments directly into the audio interface, no mixer. This is kind of the configuration I was talking about before. The big pro, as I mentioned, is that there's no noise floor. When you record straight into the audio interface, there's no additional crud being introduced into the signal, which is pretty crucial. But the downside, of course, is that you got to go ahead and fire up all the robots before you can just jam, Like, I keep an acoustic piano around, so I can just sit and play piano. And there's something really nice about not needing to turn on the computer when you want to just flow. So that's where the analog studio is sweet. So it's kind of a trade-off. I think 99% of the people who are composers nowadays just go straight into the interface. And then essentially that means that their mixer is the computer. So you got to have the computer open to do anything. So that can be kind of alienating at times. But assuming that we're going to do a digital studio configuration for most of you, where you have a nice sound card and you're connecting your interfaces, your instruments straight into it. Another thing to mention about this configuration is usually you end up getting a multi-channel audio interface for this scenario, because you maybe have a piano, and then you have maybe a vocal mic, then maybe you have a guitar. You don't want to have to necessarily plug and unplug all the cables when you're switching between instruments. You want to have them all connected all the time. So you might, in that case, consider maybe one of those audio interfaces. I'm going to take a quick moment to head over to my web browser, make sure this works. I'm just going to head up and look at Motu Ultralight. For those of you who are considering getting into an audio interface, this is a really, really solid one for the money. It's about $500 or $600. It's got a whole bunch of jacks on the back and a couple of mic pre's, 2 mic pre's, and maybe 8 or 10 analog balanced audio ins and outs. So I use one of these. I keep one of these around and I just have my instruments connected to it. And you could even wire that up to a patch bay if you were really feeling nerdy. But for the most part, it's just a nice little desktop box that records lots of different signals and sends them all back out in really nice resolution. They make a smaller version. Oh, look, here's $300 for a used one. That's awesome. At Reverb, I would just buy that. But, lots of great music is made without any sort of fancy technology. There, head back over here and hold on a sec. There we go. Cool. Sorry you had to see that big mess for a sec. So yeah, the signal flow. So in general, with the signal flow path, you always just want to visualize your sound source heading right into your recording device, and that's when it gets converted to digital, and now it's in the workstation. That's essentially it. But yeah, do you have a question maybe?
Yeah, a quick request from Tim. Could you share the screen of the product?
Oh yeah, you bet. I'm gonna have to just get out of full screen mode. That's what screwed me up last time here real quick. There we go. So yeah, this is just a nice picture of the box, but this link I saw right here at Reverb, they're a great deal. They're a great retailer too, by the way. Support Reverb if you're buying any gear. But there for around $300, you're getting into a used version of that thing. And they come with a really nice warranty too. Like we were talking about things that are serviceable. Motu has this awesome repair policy that they don't really publish, but if anything ever goes wrong with it, you send them $100 and they send you a new one. It's
James,
amazing. Yeah, yeah.
we're still not seeing the product screen, so I
Oh,
think it's a setting.
I apologize. That's my own Zoom screw up here. Let's see. New. Oh, you know what? Yeah, just a sec. That was my fault. Thank you very much for your help with that. I should be in it now. Can you see it now? Great. So yeah, the Motu Ultralight. I apologize for, I was focusing on my slideshow, right? So yeah, these are around $600 new, but I was excited about this Reverb link. Reverb.com is where you can get one for cheaper if you want. But
Question.
Sure.
Gail asked, what mic would you recommend to record an acoustic instrument?
Great. In general, with acoustic instruments, you also use a large diaphragm condenser microphone. The big thing that you're really going to need, more importantly than just the same microphone you would use for dialogue, because it could be the same exact mic, is that you're going to need the microphone placement is actually more important than you maybe would think, because the distance a microphone is and its axis in relation to the sound wave has a drastic impact on the quality of the recording. And so you could use that same large diaphragm condenser mic, but guess what? Not the tabletop blue podcast one we were talking about, that Yeti. That would be not so great for recording acoustic instruments because it's sitting on the table all the time. So for acoustic instrumentation, the kind of prohibitively challenging factor that keeps people from getting great acoustic recordings at home is not so much the microphone, because you can again use the same mic you would use for your dialogue. It's the placement of the mic. And so this is where you need to get a shock mount and a boom mic stand that's pretty nice. Like, don't buy the cheap boom stand, buy the nice one. So a good boom stand is going to be $80, but it's going to be heavy and strong, and it's going to hold your $200 microphone nice and solid right in front of the sound hole of your harp or of your acoustic guitar or whatever. And that's going to facilitate the positioning of that large diaphragm condenser. Because the thing that you may or may not realize is that with a large diaphragm condenser mic or any condenser mic, you cannot touch the thing, like basically ever. So especially if you're recording. So, but it's got to be positioned right over the sound hole. So this is why recording engineers still exist in the modern world, because that person that puts the mic in the perfect position and makes sure nobody touches it, and also makes sure that the guitar player feels comfortable and isn't like, because obviously if you're like trying to lean over to get in front of the mic, your performance is going to be jacked. So the performer's got to feel like they're in their flow, and that condenser mic. And here's a little tip I can give you. See, I'm holding my hand up like this. This is the distance that the microphone should be from the sound source with an acoustic instrument. So if you went ahead and put your hand, like here's the sound hole and here's the microphone, just barely get your hand in between there. That's a great distance. And then the other thing is, you don't want the capsule parallel with the sound hole. You want it at a little bit of an angle. So again, this is not a recording arts class, but I'm very happy to answer this question. I would say get 4 fingers away from the sound hole and tip the mic a little bit at a little bit of an angle, and have it in a really nice boom mic stand with a shock mount. So, you know, just since we're sitting here looking at the internet, let's just boom mic stand. I'll make a recommendation. There's a brand called see, they have these $30, $40 ones. Do not get those. There's B&K is this brand that I really like. B&K. Let's been a while since I've bought one of these things. Some German brand. KC, no, I don't remember the brand, but watch for a nice weighted bass boom mic stand. There was a brand B&K, or sorry, I'm spacing the brand name, but the brand isn't so important. What's important is that don't get the $30 one. Like, see, even this has the bass is 3 different legs. Those are a pain in the butt. Get one with a circular weighted bass, then you're gonna have a really nice mic stand. It doesn't seem like it's that important, but like we were talking about with acoustic microphones, or acoustic instruments, they're not very loud. So you got to get the mic right close, you know, it's important. The other thing that's just really, really important with home recording is that you get the trim up nice and loud as you can without being in the reds. So that's kind of the acoustic instrument recording workflow, and vaguely at least. Does that help? Cool, thanks. Great, so I'm more than happy to answer any other questions. Otherwise, I'll just probably keep on moving here with this guy. We're moving on to chapter 4 here. I think we're right on time. The studio, how to position your equipment and acoustically treat the room to get the best results. This is another thing that's kind of outside of the realm of composers, but honestly, you want to have a nice quiet room, not only for your recordings, obviously, to not be able to hear traffic in the background and stuff, but when it comes to post-production and balancing your arrangement, getting all the levels just right, having a really quiet room can go a really long way. Makes a big difference, especially when it comes to mixing those bass instruments, cellos and stuff. It's hard to hear the low end if you've got a weird sounding room. So the room size and shape is pretty important. The worst sounding rooms are square or rectangular, which is unfortunate because chances are you're in a square or rectangular room. If you do happen to have any rooms that break the rules of right angles or parallel surfaces, those are gonna always sound the best. So any chance you can have to distort the shape of the room with physical objects is great. Like, for instance, a closet is a square, but not when it's all full of clothes, you know? So these are ways that you can just essentially just distort the reflective surfaces in the room so they're not necessarily in parallel with each other. Because when 2 walls are parallel with each other, there becomes what's called a standing wave, where you have phase cancellation because of certain frequencies that are building up in between the 2 parallel walls as they bounce back and forth. It's like an essential principle of acoustics, phase cancellation due to parallel surfaces. So the tips I wrote here is that smaller rooms, let's see if I can move this thing away. Smaller rooms have more reflections, but bigger rooms sound boomy. So a medium-sized room with different lengths of walls and ceiling height is optional. Optimal, pardon me. There's a really cool thing, the golden ratio, some sacred geometry. But basically, if you just look that up for a little fun reading sometime, especially if you're a nerd, because the greatest studios in the world are all built using this golden ratio, which is making sure that the walls and ceiling height those numbers are not the same. They're all different by a certain ratio. You can read more about that on the internet, I'm sure. We don't have tons of time to get into it. But that's the thing about the room. Speaker placement is another really important thing. There's a rule here you can remember called the equilateral triangle rule. A lot of you probably already know this, and this is just saying that however far away you are from the speakers is how far apart they should be. So if you're sitting in your sweet spot and where your speakers need to be is 5.5 feet away from you, they should be 5.5 feet apart. It's just that simple. It's not a big deal. But beyond that, you generally want to have your speakers opposite the farthest wall with the most absorption. So what I mean by that is, if you look in your room and see, okay, I've got a bookshelf over here on this one wall, that's going to be the wall that you want the speakers to be pointing at. So you'd want to set your studio up opposite the bookshelf. So like the room I'm in right now, where I have this wall right behind me, would be an awful place for an actual studio environment. If I turned around though, so the whole big room was behind me, and there's like a couch back there, it's gonna be great. You know, the couch in the back of the studio is not just for your fans to sit and watch you mix. It's actually it's a big bass trap. So that in fact, if you look behind the control room of any real studio, in other words, like directly behind the mixer where the person is sitting, so you're sitting at the console directly behind you, looks like a wall, but it's actually not. It's a thin sheet of like fabric, and then it's a big hollow chamber back there full of stuff, because the idea is that the sound travels over your head and doesn't bounce back at you. It just gets absorbed directly behind you. So that's really important. The other cool principle I can mention is that just simply offsetting the angle a little bit on the speakers can really help acoustics too. So there's this tendency, because we love symmetry, to put it like the speakers right in the middle so it's all symmetrical in the room, and acoustically that's actually usually the worst place to do it. Sometimes I'll just move the desk to the left a little and then angle the speakers a little. So now imagine that sound wave shooting over my head, and instead of it bouncing right back at me, it gets like killed, it gets terminated by going into a corner, you know? So you're trying to terminate those reflections, ideally, is really what you're trying to do with speaker placement. Some really nice monitors, studio monitors, will have room modes that'll allow the speaker to contour its output based on where it is in the room. That's it's a higher price point option. For most intensive purposes, I think just offset them in the room a little bit and try and shoot them at the most diffused surface possible. So on that note, last little tip I'll give you here is about acoustic treatment. This is advice that one of my mentors in acoustics told me years ago, is sit right in the mix position, like right where you want to be making music, and just imagine all the flat surfaces in the room are covered in mirrors. And anywhere you can see the speakers in the mirror is where you need to absorb the most. Because, you know, that straight line of sight is the same path that the sound wave is going to travel on. And so parallel walls on the sides of you, usually if those were mirrors, you could see the speakers. That's where you get heavy treatment. And then also directly behind the speakers in the middle, that's always an accumulation area in between the two speakers. So directly behind the speakers, directly opposite the speakers, always needs heavy treatment, side walls as well. And then the best tip I was going to give you there is mineral fiber. You can build your own acoustic panels for insanely cheap, but I found a set on the internet last night for $45, and it was 2 3-foot by 2-foot panels that were 4 inches thick. I mean, it would cost $100 a piece to make these on the cheap. So you can buy them on the internet now. There's a place, here we go again, I gotta do this. Let's see. New share, heading over to my web browser really quick. Owens Corning acoustic panel kit. Did I find it right away? That'd be so cool. I don't think this is the one. Acoustimac. Here, look, these are the panels. Look, $67 for this, and you're getting 4-inch thick, a 6-pack of I don't know what the dimensions are, but you just wrap these in black cloth, hang them on your wall, and these are the very, very best sound treatment panels that you can get anywhere. Owens Corning 703 mineral fiber fiberglass. If you go to Paisley Park, this is the stuff that's on the walls, you know, but you can buy it and build it yourself for wicked cheap. And that's going to be a great choice. Another really fun place to check out if you're going on the mega cheap is foambymail.com. I love this website. They just have tons of foam stuff, but you can get acoustic treatment stuff here for just crazy cheap. Like, dang, this website is so much bigger than it used to be. I haven't been here in a long time, but you could find acoustic foam. Yeah, look at this. Look at all these acoustic treatment panels they have, like acoustic wave foam. I don't know, this stuff is not anywhere near as good of absorption as the Owens Corning option, but we hang this stuff around Slam Academy too, and you can get it for super cheap. They have these really nice bass traps. They're really cool. Bass absorbers. These things are really nice. And they're cheap. It's like this corner bass solution. This guy here, I don't know, they're cheap. You can stack them up in the corners of your room, and high frequencies get distorted from the flat surfaces on the walls when they reflect, but low frequencies get distorted when they build up. Because you don't really hear bass with your ears, you feel it with your body. So it's like a different physical beast that we're dealing with low end. And so bass gets built up in the corners of the room. And what happens when that happens is you can't hear the bass as well. You're trying to blend the low end instruments together and they're all swelling up and it just sounds muddy. It's because your room has bass accumulation in the corners of the room. So these little corner bass traps are cheap and awesome. You can throw them in the corners of your room. They still won't work as well as a cardboard box full of socks though. So if you can deal, another tip from my mentors, they said cardboard box or a poster tube, punch it with a bunch of holes and then fill it with like old t-shirts and socks. Sounds very ghetto, but it totally sounds great and really, really absorbs the bass better than these foam things do. So if you're feeling creative and you're not embarrassed by this idea, go really on the cheap and, take your old sock drawer and throw it in a cardboard box and punch some holes in it. Because it's the more diverse thicknesses and densities of materials, the wider spectrum of frequencies that it will absorb. So this foam thing is cool, but it is all one density. So really there's only one frequency that it's optimally isolating. If this was made of 4 different kinds of foam and had some really dense foam in the middle, or maybe had a bunch of socks and t-shirts in it, it would absorb better. So anyway, I better keep moving because we're just about out of time. In fact we are, but I'm gonna just finish up my little spiel if that's okay with you guys. We're just about there. Talked about acoustic treatment and that stuff is super fun. The other thing I wanted just to mention is that those mineral fiber panels that you're going to build, maybe hang those from the ceiling. Hang one from the ceiling like a cloud and let it kind of swing around in a chain or two. We're getting out of low budget studio build zone, but that is really classy and really helps the sound quality of a room too, having one floating cloud overhead directly over your head. I mentioned the mineral panels. The other thing I'd like to mention is vocals, the closet. Lots of great albums have been made with vocals that were recorded in a closet, and don't take the clothes out of there. What do they say? Closets are great. Keep the clothes in the closet and run a mic cable and some headphones into the closet. And honestly, the closet full of clothes is a great vocal recording area, especially if there's no surfaces that are exposed. So I was just going to mention that tip, just because I know a lot of you are recording vocals, that it might seem like your room is really quiet, but when you record those vocals and listen back closely, you will hear the air conditioner. So even right now in my room, I can hear subtle things, and in the recording, it seems to really jump out at you. So yeah, those are my tips for getting a successful home recording and composition. I guess home recording studio is kind of in some ways what it turned into, set up for you guys. And I'm super excited about getting any questions from you in the email or anything. And again, I'm honored to be a presenter here with ACF and Springboard and Slam Academy. And so thank you guys for asking such great questions and listening. I'll open this up for questions right now if anyone wants to pop one off.
The pop-up question would be, what about headphone for mixing and record, and what should we look for? And there's another one, will your slides be made available? So while I think we'll just take these last 2 questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Slideshow, no problem. Just email me, I guess, or else if ACF or Springboard wants to distribute it, just let me know, guys, and I'll totally just hand the slideshow over. It's no problem. But the question about the headphones is a critical question. And in fact, frankly, that's another slide I should slide into this slideshow for next time. Is I want to point out that having a nice set of headphones has always been really important, but it has become a little less important recently because of this amazing technology that you can get for free right now during the outbreak. It's called SonarWorks. I'm not sure if any of you have actually experienced SonarWorks, but essentially it's a headphone EQ calibration software that you can run in the background on your computer. It's insanely high tech. It's beautiful. I'll go ahead and even, I'm gonna open mine up quick. I'm gonna share my screen. See my messy desktop here for a sec, but if I open up the SonarWorks system-wide software, this is some amazing stuff. I can tell it which kind of software, or which kind of headphones I'm currently wearing. Turn it on here quick. And it'll compensate the EQ curve for the make and model of headphones that I'm wearing. And you can even send your specific set of headphones to them in like Latvia or whatever, and they will design an EQ curve just for that single physical set. But right now, this software called Reference 4 is a $100 software package that's free during the outbreak. SonarWorks, and all you need to do is just create a profile for the certain kind of headphones that you have. So like right now I'm wearing Sennheiser HD25s, which I highly recommend. They're expensive though, but they do have a little bit of a bass bump. Look at that. So I turn this on and I hit this button and now I'm hearing it like it would sound to anyone else not using my headphones. And when I first saw this technology, I was like, that's a lot of dorking around. But then I started using it and it is shocking how much it works. And I've always said, don't try to mix anything in headphones. You'll never get a good mix, which is generally true unless you're using SonarWorks. So I've been amazed at the mixes that my students are getting in their bedrooms just using this Reference 4 software and just dialing in which kind of headphones you got. And again, it's free. And I think they're running it for free through July or something like that. And then you can get an EDU discount on it for $50 if you are a student anywhere. So take a class at Slam Academy or anywhere, you know, and then you can get access to all these great EDU discounts and stuff. So, but yeah, SonarWorks, that's my answer to your question. And as far as headphones are concerned, Sennheiser, again, is the brand that I think they're just awesome. They have open back headphones. The model is called the Sennheiser 600. And if money is not an object, buy those. For the rest of us, just use whatever you can get your hands on and grab a copy of SonarWorks.